Thank you for joining us today. Today we are privileged to have Major General Brian Smokey Robinson, the Director of Operations, J3, Headquarters United States Transportation Command, joining us for Round 4 of the Airlift Tanker Association Virtual Seminar Series. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the speaker and do not reflect the official policy or position of the United States Air Force, the Department of Defense, or the United States government. Please take advantage of the question and answer feature in Teams to submit your questions anytime during the presentation. There is no need to wait until the end of the presentation portion to submit your questions. The earlier we get your question, the more likely we are to get to it in the time allotted. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce one of my former bosses, a great American and a pioneer and patriot of mobility, General Robinson.
Hey, Alex, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and participate in round 4 of this virtual seminar series. I'm excited about doing this and looking forward to communicating and exchanging ideas with the field of folks that are attending. So what a great opportunity. I appreciate the invite, and I'm humbled and ready to get started. So what I think I'll do is, and also I'd just like to say thanks to the ATA senior leaders, John McNabb and General Finley, for offering this up as an opportunity as well. So I appreciate that greatly. I know John McNabb is otherwise predisposed with some technology challenges, but we'll connect with him later. I think what I would do is just spend about 10 or 15 minutes talking about what's on Transcom's mind, what we're doing here, if you will, and focused on here in the near term, and a little bit in the out years, and then really just open it up to Q&A, because that's really where the most valuable exchange of information comes from that Q&A session. So if you don't have any objections to that, Popeye, I'll take that path.
Absolutely not, sir.
All right, briefly, Transcom's mission, I would give you our warfighting perspective, and that's really to be able to project and sustain power at the time and place of the choosing for the nation, right? And we do that clearly through our components, Air Mobility Command, Military Sea Lift Command, and Service Distribution and Deployment Command, to make that a reality. But we have a key role here at the command headquarters in terms of shaping the environment and setting the conditions for the components to succeed from that perspective. But in our strategy for the next 5 years or more, we have 4 priorities we focus on to make that improve our game, if you will, in that regard. Number 1, as always, is warfighting readiness. We'll talk about that a little bit. And then number 2 is cyber domain mission assurance, because we depend greatly on the cyber domain to do what we do for global command and control. Evolving for tomorrow in accordance with the National Defense Strategy and the capabilities that the department needs the entire joint force to be moving toward for the near peer competition. Number 3, advancing decision making. So that we can make the right decisions in a timely, speed of relevance manner for the no matter what the tempo of the engagement is that we're involved in. And then lastly, really what would be the 5th, but as always, taking care of the troops. Bottom line, as always, one of the adages I grew up with is take care of the people, and the mission will take care of itself, because the people will focus on the mission. So those are the priorities of the command. There's a couple things we consider key to what we saw, 3 things really, for our warfighting framework that we focus on. 1 is the global mobility posture, right? Transcom and its components do not do what we do without the infrastructure for access, basing, and overflight that we have in all domains and that we seek to maintain. So be it rail in the CONUS, highways in the CONUS, access for overflight or landing rights or seaports overseas in OCONUS. We count tremendously on that to make our mission successful. That's followed closely by our capacity to execute across the posture and the network that we have. And so with 85% of the joint force being stationed in the CONUS now, the ability to maneuver the force at the time and place of the nation's choosing is key to deterrence, and letting anyone know that we will be there for whatever the cause is, that we can actually maneuver our force to get there on time and credibly with the right capabilities that are needed for the situation, be them humanitarian relief or defense support to civil authorities, or supporting global commands with the actions that they may need to take with regard to kinetic activity from there. A couple of key things that we're focused on at Transcom is the air refueling force element, if you will. Air refueling is unique in the sense that it is in great demand, and it covers, I would say, multi-layered in its effectiveness for what it does. It's strategic in the sense that it provides that power projection that I just sort of referenced a few minutes ago, but it's also key to that maneuver. So the ability to swing east, west, north, or south rapidly in a time-compressed manner with the air forces anyway is at the air refueling element and refueling forces are key to making that happen quickly. And then at the tactical level, within fighting the ATO, be it in the homeland or overseas, the tankers, again, are valuable there as well. And we're not going to get persistence prosecution of the targets without the tanker force in that regard from there. Secondly, we're most focused on our sea lift capacity to make sure that we can deliver the decisive force, the heavy equipment, if you will, that needs to be delivered in terms of brigade combat teams and other forces that it just has to go by sea. Otherwise, we don't have enough C-17s or C-5s and commercial partners to make that happen. And speaking of our commercial partners, our fourth component is essential to our ability to the capacity and our ability to actually deliver the force, again, to the time and place of need. Without the fourth component, we can't do it even in steady state as well as we do it without undue stress on the organic forces. But certainly, if we ramp up for a full-blown fight, the fourth component is who we rely on heavily to make that reality and make us effective from that perspective. The warfighting framework is global command and control and integrated mobility ops, and how we command and control that. TRANSCOM is a support team command to 10 combatant commands. And so TRANSCOM and its components meeting the needs and the requirements as laid out by the joint staff, and what needs to be done and capabilities delivered. We make that happen. So we put the ING in supporting, as I like to say. Part of that is being able to command and control it in all domains, contested or uncontested, steady state, or at the high end of the fight. So one of our key focus areas there is advancing decision making. That really comes down to, in this day and age, this isn't a surprise to anybody, I think, that carries a mobile device and uses it and relies on it the way we do today. But it's about data. It's about, can we get our hands on the data? Can we collect it? Can we aggregate it? Can we analyze it? Can we synthesize it? And then can we distribute it out to the point of need for those who need it to make the timely decisions, again, at the speed of relevance? So we're really focused on that as well here at TRANSCOM and through our components, and bringing up our capabilities, again, with the evolution toward tomorrow from that perspective. So those are that's sort of the strategy horizon that's out there that we're working on. And so hopefully that might have created an itch or something for a question that somebody might want to ask in either one of those areas. But what's on our mind in the near term, I would say, is we're really working hard to continue to operate through the COVID-19 environment. Even as far back as February, our commander's guidance was the Joint Distribution Deployment Enterprise, the JDDE, has to keep moving. TRANSCOM, as well as the other functional combatant commands like SpaceCom and CyberCom, we are the key. I like to say we're the grease in the wheels of steady state competition. And without us doing what we do day in and day out, we're not going to enable the success or set the conditions for competition, the competitive space, to succeed. And what we do straight up in logistics during the COVID-19 environment, keeping that moving, effectiveness over efficiency was really the key. Our components have done a remarkable job in executing that vision and implementing that vision and executing through what they have to do. It's pretty phenomenal. It's been quite a learning experience. So even though the threat, if you will, in this case was a biologic factor, the difference between this threat and other threats that we typically focus on is this threat was global. It happened simultaneously around the globe. It didn't allow us to really focus, if you will, on one particular theater. We had to be concerned with all theaters at the same time, and keeping our hands around the situation when you had essentially 200 nations declaring their access policies that they were going to invoke in the face of COVID-19 and how they felt they needed to manage that threat on behalf of their own citizens and their home country, their homeland themselves. So we've been focused on that quite a bit, and frankly, very proud that we've been able to, through our components again, to continue to operate. It's not without challenge. If there's some questions that come up on that, I would be happy to talk about those. But in the end, we've been able to continue the mission in this environment, which has been quite eye-opening and lots of lessons learned from that. So with that, I'll pause there and open it up for questions and answer. If we don't get any, then I can move on to a different topic there, Alex, but I'll pause there and give you the mic for just a moment.
Absolutely, sir. And you did definitely overwhelm them with information because the questions started pouring in. So the first one I'm going to send you is from a Lieutenant Colonel Klimas, and he asks, "You're concerned about the amount of capacity in sea lift because of a lack of U.S. flagged ship. If our power projection is incumbent on TRANSCOM ability to send forces abroad, air power alone won't meet that capacity."
Is that a question or a comment?
It's a question. He's asking if you are concerned.
Oh, absolutely, we are concerned. Without sea lift, that's an accurate observation. We don't have a fleet big enough to deliver the required forces in the timeline that they're desired to be on station for the combatant commander to employ. So sea lift is absolutely a key area of focus for us, and the command has been quite engaged over that in the last several years, frankly, but at a peak here in the last several months. But I think we're making progress in mitigating and correcting that situation in the out years. Over.
All right, so copy that. The next question is from Neil Henschel. "Thanks for your time, General. You mentioned the NDS in your opening remarks. Can you give a couple of examples of how USTRANSCOM is changing or improving to meet the reform the department for greater performance and affordability strategic approach?"
Absolutely. So one example is we've recently had the approval of our digital modernization strategy, which is going to move us forward in how we kind of make us better and more capable in that data piece I talked about there for the global command and control. That's one area that we're looking at moving systems to the cloud, if you will, but also how we collect the data and use the different data analytic engines, whether they be organic or outsourced, in a way that we can quickly digest, understand the situation, visualize it of what the circumstances are, what's happening, particularly to our network, and where we need to respond or send our weight of effort, if you will, shift to secondary nodes as opposed to primary nodes, things of that nature from that perspective. Hopefully that answers the question. If not, I'll be happy to take a hack at it again. Over.
All right, sir. The next one's somewhat related. It says, "How does TRANSCOM plan on integrating the JADC2 concepts into future planning and operations? AMC has talked in the past about using MAF forces as passive IFR and COM nodes. What about SDDC and MSC?"
Great question. So absolutely, we are watching that closely, the JADC2, JADC2 aspect there. We cautiously are embracing it. We're incorporating it into our role in the joint warfighter concepts that we play there as a supporting combatant command to the lead service in that regard. Mobility, Military Sea Lift Command as well is looking at, is experimenting with getting the right comm kits and tools, if you will, down to the tactical level in their vessels so that we can understand the situation that they're dealing with as they sail and deliver the forces across the maritime component. And the same of our transportation battalions as they move to seaports to either load or unload cargo and equipment that needs to be sent abroad or downloaded for, again, put into position for employment.
All right, sir. The next two questions are going to be in regards to your comments with air refueling. The first one is an anonymous question, but it says, "Do you see a need for the commercial air refueling effort that is currently underway? If so, do you think it will be an enduring effort?"
That's a great question. Anything that we can do from this perspective of the combatant command to gain more capacity, I think is viewed as of value and of interest. Largely, this is a service issue to work through from that perspective in terms of organize, train, and equip to the capacities that they can bring. We certainly see that it can, we believe that it can relieve some stress of the refueling force here for what we would call normal peacetime training or administrative type activities that are in the that occur largely in the homeland. What it means for the potential that creates in terms of relieving stress on the organic force is one thing. One thing I think we should be cautious of, in my personal opinion, is it can also create the existence that there is additional capacity, which we just send that abroad, as opposed to now metering within the capacity limitations that we have with regard to task to dwell and the tempo and the force. In terms of enduring, I think too soon to tell. I think it, my personal opinion is it could fit well over time, but it depends on the business case that comes through and whether or not the use case for that lines up. But again, we defer to the Air Force and Air Mobility Command for their assessment of that.
I think the answer is going to be relatively the same, but a slightly more specific question. It says, in February, General Lyons told SASC that the Air Force should retain 13 KC-135s and 10 KC-10s to avoid mission gaps while the KC-46 comes online. With that delayed full-scale rollout of the KC-46, what is the latest plan to retain tankers slated for retirement, and will we see additional C-135s coming to active duty bases? Again, more of a command question, but if you could answer that from the TRANSCOM perspective.
Yeah, I'm not gonna answer that one completely because I know the position of TRANSCOM hasn't changed, but I do know that through the process of the POM activities that there's negotiations and final language being, I would say, penned right now. So I'm not at liberty to say what that looks like, nor do I actually know because I haven't seen it. But again, the service is working through that.
All right, copy that, sir. Have another one here for you from Dave Lang. Given the increasing threat environment as adversaries grow their multi-domain AAD capabilities and we increasingly rely on commercial lift capabilities, what do you anticipate an increased focus on the need to develop warfighting synergy between military capabilities and the commercial partners we rely upon, e.g. convoy ops, cyber defense, intelligence sharing, etc.?
I would say the way in my mind, I think about that is at this point, we can only go so far with the commercial sector. A lot of them are motivated to do the best that they can, but at the same time, there is a unique aspect of warfighting that resides strictly on the military. What we're doing is working through, I would say, branches and sequel plans, if you will, that says in certain circumstances, this is how far we can go with the commercial components, and then we have to switch to organic. And it depends on the domain. There's certain things that can be done, I think, in the cyber domain, as opposed to if we're really worried about physical kinetic activity from that perspective. But we are working really hard to get our hands around what the impact and the consequence of that is, so that we better understand if that situation does develop, then we already know what we have to do and what the outcomes will be in terms of, is it going to be reduced flow or velocity, where the secondary, tertiary locations for operations need to be, so that we can still get the fullest amount of leverage out of the commercial component possible. As far as convoy ops, we have taken some opportunities to exercise those in what I would say is service level exercises that require what TRANSCOM would normally do to support that exercise. I think the Defender series exercise, Defender 20 in Europe, is a great case for that. That was an 11 vessel solution to deploy the ground force, so robust effort from TRANSCOM and Military Sea Lift Command and SDDC at that point. Unfortunately, got cut short in the COVID environment, but several of those vessels were underway, and we did exercise some opportunities with United States Navy gray hulls to work through some of those convoy procedures. So that was very useful in that regard. So we do focus on that, and we do that in a way so we understand the limitations that could exist either through law or undue risk acceptance from the federal authorities that oversee the commercial components, in their case, in their business interests as well. Over.
All right, sir. Thanks so much for that one. Now, next question is, how is the addition of the Space Force increasing TRANSCOM's ops and support missions?
So that is a journey in progress. I'm happy to say that we should be getting a L&O team from the Space Force here in TRANSCOM already, and that was offered to us. We didn't have to go ask for it. So I think the leadership at SpaceCom understands, again, like most functional combatant commands do, they understand better than anybody that the capabilities that exist in their domain. And so they're already reaching out to collaborate across all COCOMs with that fusion, if you will, and integration at the L&O type level on each of the staff. So we're awaiting our L&O to arrive here, which we think will be sometime this summer, and then that team will grow out over the next couple of years if the plan stays on course. So I would say work in progress, but I think off to a great start.
Okay, sir, next one is, what can you tell us about the new TRANSCOM AMC Command Center? What advantages do you see from bringing them together?
So I have to admit, I have not seen, other than the being on the early ground stages of the concept for that and the idea, frankly, I have not seen any of the design phases. So I don't know much of detail about the new command center other than where it's supposed to be located when it happens. But broadly, I think it's a good idea. I don't think we're going to merge the command centers per se, but we're going to merge the planning, create a planning facility, but the 618th AOC will have its own and upgraded new, more relevant Air Operations Center to operate from there. And I believe, and if I'm wrong here, I'll correct it on the record when I go back, but I think our Op Center should stay where it is inside of our building here. Over.
Copy that, sir. The next question is, how is the command addressing risk to data and data transport that is so critical to its mission?
We take that very seriously. We see the cyber domain as our #1 threat vector among our #1 threat vectors. So we watch that very carefully through a combination of a variety of means, which I won't go into on the unclassified net. But rest assured, we pay very close attention to it, have strict, very aggressive ops reporting, and a very collaborative effort amongst the interagency to help us with that, with those that have different authorities. So we do watch it very carefully. And when we spot something or come across something, we react very quickly to put mitigation measures in place.
Okay, sir, we're going to do one more question in this block, and then everything after that is kind of you and leadership involved. But can you please tell us about your philosophy during these challenging times about collaboration with industry?
Papa, that's a great question. So I think my philosophy is we need to do better with that. I got to see a lot of this as I was on the air staff prior to coming here for 2 years, and got to see how the air staff was reforming, reshaping, and reapproaching that under the leadership of Dr. Roper. The cold hard fact remains that, much more than 3 times, if not more by now, the RDT&E in terms of capabilities are done in the private sector and corporate sector than they are in the military. Whereas, in the Cold War, in the 60s and 50s, if you will, it was the other way around. Government research fueled ideas for military necessity. Then people found ways to adapt those to civilian life, if you will. Easy examples for that are like the internet and GPS, and there's many, many more that are out there. Over time, it's flipped the ratio, as I mentioned already. So if we don't have a healthy relationship with industry to understand what it is that's even available and what capabilities they're working toward that are useful to us from a military lens, then we won't understand what's possible, what's in the realm of possible, and then have the ability to keep up with our adversaries and frankly just leverage the RDT&E that exists there. Obviously, we have to abide by the laws that exist, but the collaboration, the understanding, the communication has to happen. It's very important and vital that we understand that, so that we even know what's in the realm of possible, what we ought to be pursuing to improve our capabilities in accordance with the NDS and looking forward. I know there's a lot of effort there to improve that, and a lot of examples where we have done that, and we just have to keep on that pathway, in my opinion.
Some great insight there, sir. The next question comes from Colonel Paul Murphy. Lots of Marine and PACAF CAF discussions on agile basing and mobile basing concepts to improve survivability. Has TRANSCOM been directly involved in supporting or validating any of these, and can you discuss?
I would say I can discuss. That's a great question. So we're tracking on the conversations in pretty good detail. What we're trying to overcome is we're trying to force rather the folks that are having those conversations to truly honor and understand the logistics implications of what the operators are thinking about. It's easy to sort of just, defer that, wish it away, and say we'll deal with it when it happens. But to understand the disaggregation of logistics supply points creates a much greater demand for capacity and the ability to command and control that capacity. So just at that baseline, we have to recognize that and figure out how we want to deal with it. Either acknowledge it as a constraint and understand the constraint it's going to place on the operational concept, or if the operational concept is deemed as sufficient and it has to be what it has to be, then understand either we're going to take risk by having a finite amount of capacity, or we increase capacity to the point where we get to an acceptable level of risk for that operation to be successful. And you can break that down, I think, in terms of scalability, in terms of a very local or regional or a theater-wide conflict, and that'll have impacts on how we address that. But the reality is there are logistics implications behind every operational mission that's taken. I know everybody on the net here from the mobility forces, regardless of domain, understands that. But we have to be present for the conversation and advocate and make that clear so that it's a conscious decision, whatever decision is made by the senior leaders as they they make the most informed decision on what they finally settle in on. Thanks for that question.
All right, sir. The next questions are going into diversity and race relations. Did you want to talk on that before the questions, or do you just want to take the question?
We can go ahead and take the questions. That's fine.
All right. The question is, can you provide your perspective on the current focus on building better race relations in the Air Force? Do you have any personal experience that you would be willing to share?
So number one, I think the current focus is appropriate, and I think it's, I don't think it's, I wouldn't say it's overdue, but I think I would say a heightened awareness on it is very appropriate in that case. I really don't have any personal perspectives professionally to bring that I've experienced adversely, mostly positive, quite honestly, from that aspect. But at the same time, what I would offer is, in my existence in the Air Force, as I have been in my 33 years, I just really sought hard to understand what the standards of performance were and what they are, what's needed to solve work the issues or solve the challenges for my command echelons above me, and worked hard to show that my deeds were credible enough to move the ball forward for the team and make that happen. I think the military is unique in that regard. If you look back into the Tuskegee Airmen, the Wind Talkers, any of those minority groups over time, the Department of Defense, out of necessity, admittedly, in a lot of cases, saw fit to bring those capabilities to bear and benefit from those. But in the end, when we go to the fight, I think we value the deeds and the credibility you bring to the game because it's about getting through the fight together as opposed to other factors from there. The trick is we've got to follow those, the recognition of those deeds and accomplishments and how we value them up after the urgency of the necessity for that particular venue capability, if you will, has subsided. And understand that that is a valued capability. The diversity of thought, diversity of experience, diversity of background that people bring, different languages, if you will, in the case of the Wind Talkers, that allowed the success of the encryption and OPSEC, you know, in the wars of the past from that perspective. So I think it's very important. I think it's timely. We can't let it subside. I do appreciate that not to make it a generational comment, but relative to Gen Xer, that's me, and baby boomers, I think the more recent generations are much more willing to have the conversations about these kind of tough issues than my generation or those that have preceded mine. So I think it's healthy in the end.
Thanks, sir. The next question we're going to go into is for a lot of our younger leaders out there that are looking at going to joint commands, or will soon be going to joint commands. Is what are the challenges and what are the things that you find rewarding about working in a joint command?
This probably sounds kind of funny, but the biggest challenge is acronyms and lexicon. Each service has them, right? Army brings their own, Navy brings their own, the Marine Corps brings their own, et cetera, et cetera. Air Force brings its own. And then sometimes we're guilty of making our own up inside our own tribe as, just out of convenience of shortening of the title or a descriptor. But that's overcomable. The biggest reward, frankly, is it is the epitome of teamwork. Oftentimes you don't know what another service has in their kit bag or their capabilities or their experience, but you just have to go and ask and really getting the job done. The Joint Force does that through teamwork and the relationships that matter and that you maintain over time. I've always been a big proponent of teamwork, so I tend to have a philosophy of go big early for whatever your topic is. So if you have a sense of relevance or a stakeholder in a particular issue, invite them to the table early. And what they will do for you is they'll thank you on 2 occasions. They'll thank you for, one, recognizing that they matter and they might have a valuable contribution to make. And if the contribution is needed and warranted, they'll make it. Or they'll thank you for thinking of them for what I mentioned before, but because they are busy, they will say, hey, there's nothing I can do or very little I can do to help your case here. I appreciate it. And they'll go back to doing what they need to put their weight of effort on and where their bandwidth is going to be more useful. But in the end, you learn those capabilities quicker, better, and the team will more often than not get to the winning solution or win-win solution much faster that way, as opposed to going very far down a path in a very narrow lane, if you will, without the stakeholders present, only to learn when you get to the mile marker 23 out of 26 in the marathon, that if you'd have taken a supplement at mile marker 10 or 11, you'd be about ready to finish the race very strong, if you will. those are the two things I think that's been the benefit. But I've really enjoyed my time in the Joint Command and working with joint partners around the globe. Over.
Yeah, those acronyms and abbreviations can definitely be overwhelming. I'm going to combine two questions into one here, and it's basically, how do you see the travel restrictions imposed by COVID impacting future movement projections and applied across logistics on land, rail, and sea, as well as air?
Okay, that's a good question. So we're doing a lot of analysis on that right now and management of the travel, particularly by air for in the COVID environment. For the multitude of passengers we've moved so far, particularly globally since the COVID environment started, we actually have only had, that we know of, so the data is not perfect, but we are doing our best to get after data. We have about a 0.3% COVID positive rate of somebody arriving on the other end. So very low numbers and percentage-wise, and actual raw numbers as well by the air mode. A lot of due diligence, again, executed by the air component in terms of screening. Much of the screening entry that we saw at the commercial airports, we've implemented that at all of our air terminals. And then the combatant commands have all the services as force providers putting restrictions of movement on their personnel before they deploy, and as well. So we're working toward making it as safe as possible, as low risk as possible. But if you've been following the news out there with regard to, the pluses and minuses or pros and cons with a test or at various times, that there's not a foolproof solution out there right now, but we're doing, I think, all that we can to mitigate to the lowest possible level. With regard to the forces, so sailors, airmen, and soldiers, we're also working hard to make sure that we monitor the COVID environments in which their garrisons or their home bases exist, and manage their movement within those areas sufficiently so that they minimize their risk and maintain a capable, credible force that we can use when we need to. So that's being watched very carefully at the component levels. So we've seen things on the maritime side where, normally we can get a vessel underway in X amount of days. And now, to make sure that we don't have a cruise ship type scenario where, it sets sail and some of the crew winds up COVID positive and they can't make the port call they're supposed to make, we have an X plus Y number of days now. So we've stretched the time out so that we can manage that risk, if you will. And that's worked out very, very well. We've had, in terms of seaport operations and rail operations from SDDC, again, small numbers of soldiers and trans-battalion personnel impacted, but in a way, that's an area that we can leverage commercial or military based on the risk. So if we have a problem on the military side, we will go to the commercial side and see if they can accommodate the movement that's needed. And if not, then we figure out how we can operate with what resources we do have. So it's had an impact. I would say it's extended the amount of time that we have to plan, lead time, and just watching the status and the health of the force and their vital signs, if you will, much more closely. But so far, knock on wood, we've had pretty good success with the force preserving them, and then also with moving passengers. But we're starting to see more PCS passengers move into the Patriot Express system based on the lack of commercial air that's available, particularly to move overseas. So that's a slightly different animal to watch, or element to watch, in terms of threat vectors from COVID-19. But so far, we're doing pretty well.
Okay, sir, the next one is going to kind of go full circle, but speaking of C2, what steps is TRANSCOM and AMSP specifically taking to have truly global C2 over MAF beyond ad hoc methods such as ACARs?
So we have several efforts. That's a great question, by the way. Several efforts underway. I think they're nested with JADC2. So this command, TRANSCOM, has our capability requirements that we're leveraging on the components to bring to the table for the platforms to be able to provide, or the capability to provide, which means being able to stay connected to and establish a network from that perspective. So we're looking at, the air component, if you will, is looking at things like data link. We're looking at beyond line of sight horizon capabilities and SATCOM from that perspective, and evaluating what's going to be useful. We're studying right now the vision for the future vision for SATCOM for the Department of Defense, as established by Spacecom. which is very interesting in and of itself, but it's got some pathways, I think, that are applicable to us as well. But the bottom line is we understand the value of that and the utility of it, and we're looking to be nested with that. And there's an opportunity with the JADC2 environment that the Joint Force is underway to pursue to sort of achieve lead pursuit again and rejoin with the Air Force in the air component, but across all components with what we need to be linked in with and nested with that strategy so we have compatible capabilities, because the ability to command and control here, or if we get in a situation where a particular component has to be very integrated with an integrated and interoperable with a in the terminal phase of delivery with a supporting force to set the conditions, they've got to be able to have the right situational awareness and communicate and understand and signal the maneuvers that are needed either to protect or to be successful.
Okay, kind of growing on one of the previous questions, how is TRANSCOM adapting logistics to operate in environments where access will be contested?
So a couple of things, if you're familiar with the PACE, Primary Alternate Contingency Emergency, SDDC is working very aggressively on what we call port diversification. So we're exercising deliberately using ports that we otherwise might not use just out of cost or efficiency, if you will, but we want to actually establish familiarity with that port, put it through its paces, and understand if there's actually any physical constraints with regard to the ability to operate there if our primary node or any of our nodes that we would prefer to use are contested. So number one is always stay outside the weapons engagement zone if you can. So that's one of the things that we're doing. The other option is, again, we're practicing here in the J3 the ways that we need to be interoperable with a particular combatant command. So if you think about it from a support-head relationship, generally we're supporting, but if we have the right circumstances where there's a contested environment that exceeds the defense or force protection capabilities of our systems, the combatant command regionally usually has capabilities at their disposal that can buy down or bring down that risk. But we have to be able to be interoperable with them to understand the battle space, the timing, the tempo, the situation, and the requirements, and synchronize all that together so that they can at least temporarily suppress or mitigate or to take out the risks so that we can deliver the forces where they need them delivered. And so the tools, the processes that go with allowing that to happen, we're focused on quite heavily here going forward in our strategy for improving command and control and globally interoperated mobility.
Okay, sir, you must have a lot of friends online, because Tom Griesbaum wants to say he appreciates your time updating the community and glad to hear from you again after all those years. And he's got 3 people liking on that, so you're well liked out there.
It's good to hear from Tom again, so I appreciate that. Thanks.
All right, we're going to go into one of the questions you and I talked about a little bit previously. Can you tell a story about an airman that impacted you?
Yeah, if you'll permit me, I might tell 2, if that's okay.
Absolutely, it's your floor.
Okay, that's a hard question, quite honestly, because particularly even at the squadron command level, you have such a tight relationship that develops with your squadron mates and what you do for each other, quite frankly, and how you support each other at that functional unit level, and that core unit level for the Air Force at least. But I'll tell 2 stories. Number one. There was an airman that just shows you that anything's within reach. But what was impressive about this particular young man, he was a loadmaster in the squadron, and he had cross-trained from finance. Number one, he had emigrated with his family from Africa, right? Joined the Air Force. His family were professionals as well, well-educated, but he decided he wanted to join the Air Force, went into finance first. Well, I got to know him when he was a loadmaster in the squadron. He was in the squadron before I was, but he was dead set on earning his college degree and advancing his circumstances, if you will, in the world. And even during our deployment, when we went deployed in the 06 timeframe, he was working on his coursework, online and remotely, if you will, back in those days, to the point where, unbeknownst to me, but oftentimes if it was he had to take a test, if you will, his fellow loadmasters would cover a line for him that he was supposed to fly so he could kind of continue to work on his degree. I say that all from the contextual perspective of fast forward to when we were back in home station. He gets his degree, applies to go to OTS, and we get the pleasure of announcing to him that he was actually selected for officer training school, right? So I call him into the office to kind of give him, the news. It's the whole, set him up for thinking something big's about to happen, usually not good, right? But we go back out and we've formed up the rest of the squadron to announce to him that he's been selected to OTS. And what was phenomenal to me about this young man was the first thing he does after he's notified that he's made OTS, he thanks all of his fellow loadmasters in the squadron for the support they gave him to allow him to attain his goal, if you will. So that support, that fellowship, that teamwork as teammates and family in the squadron was pretty phenomenal. And in the end, it wasn't about what he'd achieved. He said, "Hey, I couldn't have done this without the support of all the others." So that really sticks in my mind. It has over the years that he was able to do that, and then how humble he was, and how he gave great credit to his squadron mates on that. My second example is a little bit more personal, but I'll explain why it matters and spills over into the professional force. But the other airman I would want to talk about is my bride, Maureen Robinson. And I say that because she is an airman. She was active duty when we met. She was in the reserves, for the latter part of her career. But what mattered most to me, other than being the support and the sounding board that I would need often throughout our careers, and we did that for each other, is I learned a great deal about what it takes as a reserve member, guard or reserve, to contribute and serve your country and still wear the other hats that you have to wear as a citizen airman. She taught me that. I won't, to this day, say that I understand all the languages and the different pay statuses that people have to go in, but the bottom line was she taught me enough that I get it, and I came to understand the value of the contribution of the reserve component, broadly speaking, makes to TRANSCOM and to Air Mobility Command in this case, and to the Air Force, because without them, particularly in the steady state competition phase, we know we're not getting it done without the reserve component for sure. On the tanker force alone, 70% of our daily taskings right now are covered by the Guard and Reserve on the tanker force element. That's significant, and that's steady state day to day, what others would like to call peacetime. So I give her the credit for helping me kind of open my eyes and understand the value of those members of the team, and how to reach out to them and be understanding and supportive of all the things that they're trying to balance in their careers and their personal lives, and in a way that they can still serve their country. So those are the two that I think stand out the most in my mind.
Those are great stories, and kudos for getting a wife story in there, because they are so important to what we do, whether it's supporting at home or, in your case, the insight that she provided. So that's fantastic. Two more questions, and then I think we're going to be wrapping up. Regarding the COVID-19 issue and transporting infectious patients, we have seen where the Air Force has acquired modified shipping containers to transport people. Do you see this as an airworthy solution and a long-term solution?
Yes and yes. So phenomenal job by the Air Force as a whole for meeting a JUON, I think in near record time, but certainly very, very quickly. And to go to what is a really simple solution, but proving hugely effective. I think if I recall, we're probably on our second, maybe third mission with that, with the negative pressure Connex between CENTCOM and back to pulling COVID positive troops back to facilities at UCOM right now at Ramstein. So I see it as a long-term solution. We're embracing that, I think, and we're making sure one of the lessons learned there was the TIS, if you will, the Transportation Isolation System. That got fielded just after its need, really, I think, on the downside of the glide slope for that. And we went to reach back for that equipment, and we weren't sure where it all was, and the need in the years since had sort of dissuaded the need to kind of maintain it. But this is showing us a new environment, and we're going to have a better capability for it. We have a better capability for it, both in the strategic lift aircraft and the tactical aircraft as well, C-130. And we're going to manage that, I think, the right way, and we'll bridge off of that. But we're calling that success, I think, at least from the COCOM perspective. Over.
All right, sir, since you just mentioned the C-130, which I know is close to your heart, I'm going to finish you off with a C-17 question. It says, being there at the start, what's your view on the evolution of the C-17 as time has passed to meet missions it's been assigned?
That's a question riddled with a lot of nostalgia, quite honestly, because it wasn't quite the start, to be honest. It was the second wave, but early on in its life as a fleet. Um, I think that the fleet's got more in it, quite frankly, for emissions, but it's done very, very well with the missions it's been assigned and what it's adapted to over the years. But that kind of brings me back to that industry question, right? Um, Industry can help us with what is in the realm of possible to be able to adapt the fleet we have right now to a new mission or a new mission segment. Night vision goggles would be an easy example. It didn't start out doing that. There's been a lot of software upgrades as well from that perspective. So it's got a lot more to give, but we have to embrace that. It's going to be around for a while, right? And I think how we acquire, my personal opinion is how we acquire the hardware. The airframe is known as the C-17 is going to be around for a long time, as are many other platforms. But there's certain systems on the aircraft that have to be upgraded, that will be upgraded either through obsolescence, and that obsolescence comes through supply chain obsolescence, or it comes through policy obsolescence. So ADS-B and CNMTS are two examples. If the ICAO or FAA decides that we're moving in this direction, that we're going to have to adapt and upgrade those subsystems that will still allow the airframe, known as the C-17, to be employable in the ways that we need to be employed. So one thing I think we can adapt in terms of how we look at managing the life cycle of weapon systems over the years is we have to figure out how to design in a deliberate tech refresh on some key elemental subsystems, if you will. Command and control would be one of those systems, as some of those subsystems as well. Doesn't mean that we go buy something new, but with Moore's law and how it plays and everything being so software driven, the odds are that something's going to come along and need to be upgraded or retrofitted, or we can deliberately, instead of waiting until it just arrives at us as a unfunded mandate that we have to figure out how to fund because it's required, we can figure out how to design a deliberate tech refresh window. I know we can't do it in the cycle that's as tight as Moore's law, but we can certainly do it in something that's tighter than 7 or 10 years. That's my opinion on that. Thanks for that question, Alex.
All right, sir, that finishes up the questions. So General Robinson, thank you so much for that insight into what's going on at TRANSCOM and your leadership perspectives. I know our attendees learned a lot. TRANSCOM's responsible for so much of what goes on across the globe, and we appreciate you making time for us today. Do you have any closing remarks?
No, I would just close with thank you, and I say thank you to all the military members at the tactical echelons. So in the components, TRANSCOM and the components having a tremendous reputation right now. Always have, but particularly right now in the dynamic force employment, steady state competition phase. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for how you get the work done and you accomplish and come through every time. Just know that we're watching here in concert with the headquarters of your components in terms of balancing capacity with requirements, and we'll keep doing that because we know that we need to do that so it's sustainable for the long haul for all of our sailors, airmen, Marines, and soldiers that are getting the job done where the rubber meets the road. So I just appreciate all that work, and we endeavor to make sure that you understand why it's important, the missions that are assigned, and give you the context within which to make the right decisions at all echelons below in a fairly relevant and speed-relevant manner. So thank you, and thanks for the opportunity to do this, Alex, and to John McNabb and John Finley as well. I really enjoyed this. So if there's any other unanswered questions that didn't come through, let me know, and we can circle back on those, Alex.
Nope, there was just one more comment, and it said, Smokey, great session. Thanks to all the ATA team for an informative and insightful session from both of our friends Spanky. So lots of great people out there watching today. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to go ahead and take the screen from you, and we're going to talk a little bit about what our next seminar is going to be. So coming up on the 24th of July, we're going to have Chief Master Sergeant Retired Mike Curver is going to join us for a round with what he's calling the Fours, which is a candid roundtable discussion with fellow ATA leaders and key volunteers. And they're literally just going to sit around and talk about current issues, current events, and what's going on there. Take your questions, whether it be about ATA, whether it be about what's going on in the world. So definitely an interactive session, and we're really looking forward to it. So we hope to see as many of you there. And please, if you're enjoying these events, tell your friends, tell your supervisors, tell your wing commanders about how valuable this is. If there's something you want to see, please email us at admin@airlifttanker.onmicrosoft.com and let us know. Or if you want to be one of our guest speakers, we'd love for you to come find us because that would just be fantastic. Thank you again for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon. The views expressed in this presentation are those of the speaker and do not reflect the official policy or position of the United States Air Force, the Department of Defense, or the United States government. Please send comments and suggestions for future topics and guests to us at admin@airlifttanker.onmicrosoft.com. Thanks again for joining us today, and we hope to see you again in 2 weeks.